From nuclear testing experiments to infecting many with life-threatening diseases, here are your top 10 evil human experiments that went horribly wrong. In our number 10 spot, we have the hepatitis outbreak. Allegedly, in the 50s, there was a New York state-run institution for mentally handicapped young ones called Willowbrook State School, and it unfortunately was known for its uncleanliness, and as a result, the school had an outbreak of hepatitis. A doctor got wind of what was going on in that school, and he created an experiment that would assist in developing a vaccine. The only problem is the experiment would involve deliberately infecting the young ones with the disease. Horrible. His name was Dr. Sewell Krugman. The experiment received a lot of attention from the media, but the parents signed permission slips, so people let it go, unfortunately. However, apparently it was very hard to get into this school, so some think that parents felt that they had to sign these forms and allow it in order to keep their kid there. I can imagine that in the 50s there wasn't a lot of options, so that's truly sad, especially hearing that their only option was an extremely dirty school. In our number 9 spot, we have nuclear testing. In 1954, the US government started performing nuclear tests near the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. The US was performing a series of nuclear tests that they called Castle Bravo, and these tests unfortunately resulted in a yield larger than anticipated. This then led the government to create Project 4.1, where they decided to study how the humans, the Marshallese nearby, were affected by the explosion. Some believe that the explosion and its impact was all an accident, but some believe that the US government planned this so that they could study and see how these people would be affected. Many of the Marshallese people had radiation poisoning, and of course, as you can imagine, many developed cancer that is believed to be associated with the explosion. Beta burns were also seen after the incident. In our number 8 spot, we have electroshock therapy. Some of these experiments quite possibly could have been done by people that believe that they are doing some good, but they themselves are insane. Either that or they are evil, because to experiment on young ones in any way is truly sickening. Here we have a doctor in the 1960s named Dr. Loretta Bender, who worked at New York's Creedmoor Hospital, and she began a treatment that she believed to be a revolutionary treatment for kids with social issues. It was electroshock therapy. She would interview and analyze a young one in front of a large group of people, and she would apply pressure to their heads. Apparently, the people who would move were considered to have shown early signs of schizophrenia. It was said that she was not sympathetic to the young patients, and that in her time she used this electroshock therapy on over 100 young ones. It is unknown how these young ones were affected long term. In our number 7 spot, we have the Stuttering Experiment. Here we have yet another experiment that makes my blood boil. I'll get to why in a bit. This test took place in 1939 by Wendell Johnson and Mary Tudor, and the purpose of this test was to analyze the psychology around why people stutter and or how it can be cured. These researchers experimented on 22 young orphans and separated them into 2 groups. One group got praise for how they spoke, and the other group got negative feedback. The group that got negative feedback had normal speaking orphans suddenly begin to develop speech problems that apparently they had for the rest of their lives. I myself have struggled with speaking in my past, and that is why I actually started pushing myself to be in front of the camera and practice. So it's definitely hard to hear about experiments like this that could truly make or break the confidence of a young person. So gross. In our number 6 spot, we have the prison transplants. From 1913 to 1951, there was a surgeon doctor at California's San Quentin prison by the name of Dr. Leo Stanley, who obviously had access to many patients in the prison, and so he began to start testing on them. The experiments would range from sterilization to potential treatments for the Spanish flu to performing transplant surgeries. The transplant surgeries would actually be testicle transplants using testicles of executed prisoners, and sometimes from animals like goats, for example. Yeah, that is truly horrific and definitely evil, and arguably he should have been in this prison. Isn't it weird how many horrible prison guard or prison doctor stories there are out there about them mistreating the inmates, something that I'm sure a lot of prisoners were imprisoned for, makes you think. In our number 5 spot, we have the Guatemalan test subjects. From 1946 to 1948, the US government, the president of Guatemala, and the health ministry in Guatemala were all in cahoots with each other, and they began performing experiments on Guatemalans without their consent. They were made to participate. Doctors deliberately infected people with syphilis and sexually transmitted diseases to track their untreated natural progression. Holy moly. When you think about it, that was after the war and only 76 years ago. It would be naive to think that this would never happen again. These patients were only given antibiotics to help. This resulted in 30 deaths, however that is only what was documented. We don't actually know how many deaths actually occurred from this. It was only in 2010 that the US government made a formal apology for their involvement. In our number 4 spot, we have the Tuskegee Experiment. This one is another experiment that is just simply so gross that it's hard to even talk about. In 1932, the US Public Health worked with the Tuskegee Institute to track the natural progression of untreated syphilis. 600 people from Alabama were experimented on and infected with syphilis, and of the group, 399 already had syphilis. None of them were told that they had a disease that was life-threatening. They were told that they would receive free health care for participating, free meals, and burial insurance. The study continued till 1972, long after a cure was found. Many passed away and got severely ill from this experiment. In 1997, the president at the time, Bill Clinton, apologized to those affected, and he called this the most infamous biomedical experiment in US history. That was said in 1997 though, so I'm sure there have been more famous worldwide biomedical experiments now that perhaps we, the public, are just not aware of yet. If it took 25 years to get a formal apology and for it to become public knowledge, then who knows what we might discover and get an apology for in the future. In our number 3 spot, we have the Mosquito Experiment. How more people don't know about these experiments is truly beyond me. This one is deeply shocking to hear, so brace yourself. In 1956 and 1957, the US Army, aka the government because it would have had to have been approved, conducted a series of experiments on Florida, Georgia, and Savannah where they released millions of infected mosquitoes in order to see if insects could spread yellow fever. Of course, they learned that yes, they can, as many people contracted fevers, serious respiratory problems, stillbirths, typhoid, and much more. Apparently, to take it another step further, in order to get photo evidence of the experiment, researchers acted as health workers so they could see the patients. Many died from this experiment, as you can imagine. I wonder if there are any long-term effects for the people in these areas. I guess that's info I'm sure we'll never know. It's probably kept in top secret places like Area 51, let's be real. In our number 2 spot, we have Korean experimentation. Allegedly, there have been a ton of North Korean experiments over the years on prisoners. One experiment that has been spoken about was one where 50 female prisoners, all of good health, were given poisoned cabbage leaves. Apparently, within the hour, all had died. Allegedly, they also do experimental surgeries without anesthesia, starve them, and at times gas entire families. It is rumored that there is a van called The Crow where people are taken every month for these experiments. I truly hope that this is something from the past, but I know that there will always be evil in the world as much as we all wish there wasn't, so I wouldn't be surprised to hear that this is possibly something that still happens, and I truly hope it isn't. In our number 1 spot, we have Navy volunteers. In 1943, young men who were in the Navy were basically tricked into volunteering themselves to be gassed. This happened in the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington in the US. They were told that this experiment might help shorten the war, and so of course they wanted to do their duty and help. They were exposed to mustard gas, which of course was a deadly gas that was actively used in World War I. They were only told what they were participating in once the experiment was about to start. All of the soldiers suffered severe external and internal burns. All of the people were allegedly silenced and threatened by the Navy, and it wasn't until the 90s, when the documents were declassified, was this experiment taken to Congress. I'm Melissa Malati, and I hope that you have a good day, sir.